everyone. I'm the moderator for this 20-minute session. My name is Stephanie Caden. I'm from Harvard University Brigham and Women's Hospital, and I see a lot of familiar faces and names here. So we're going to get started with this session on the top global EM articles of 2020, highlights from the Global Emergency Medicine Literature Review, or GEMLR. One quick update to our speaker list before we get started. So unfortunately, both Tom Becker and Indy Trehan are not able to join us today. So our only speaker for the session today is Sean Kivelhan. Dr. Kivelhan is from the Harvard University Brigham and Women's Hospital, and he is the incoming managing editor of the Global Emergency Medicine Literature Review. So what we'll do now is I'll turn it over to Sean in just a moment. I would ask that we save all of our questions until the end of Sean's presentation. And I will ask everyone at that time to raise your hand if you have a question and ask it out loud when I call on you. So with that said, Sean, tell us about the top global EM articles of 2020.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I'm going to share my slides. Thanks everybody for coming. Good to see so many familiar faces, both from the global emergency medicine world in GEMA and also from GEMLR. There's several people here who have been involved either currently or in the past. So really excited to be here. And I'd also like to thank GEMA for sponsoring this talk for us at SAEM today. So what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or less, so we can leave a few minutes for questions, is briefly talk about the history of GEMA, GEMLR, the methods that we use to identify and analyze articles, and then we'll go over 3 of what we found were the top articles for this year. So, the Global Emergency Medicine Literature Review. As some of you know, it's been around for a little while. It's currently in its 15th year of publication. It was, and it has published annually in academic emergency medicine. Over the years, many global emergency medicine practitioners have passed through its ranks and been involved, and it has served as a great breeding ground for future global emergency medicine specialists. The mission of GEMLR is to really identify and then disseminate high-quality global emergency medicine research. By doing this, we hope that we show best practices and that we encourage future research, not just by people reading the research that's out there and identifying it, but also the many people that participate in GEMLR and helping them learn research methods so that they can go out and continue or advance research in the field. And the overarching goal is to strengthen research capacity around the world and the professionalization of global emergency medicine. It's important to note the GEMLR Annual Review is not a formal systematic review or meta-analysis. It's a literature review where we actually go through the different papers in a structured way. However, we do in parallel run an annual systematic review now for the past about 5 years, and that topic varies and is made up of past GEMLR reviewers and editors. The first step each year is we do a large multilingual Medline search. This goes through emergency care terms and also global health terms. The terms vary, and some of the other things that I'm going to talk about vary each year. We have several standing committees made up of current and former GEMLR editors and reviewers that each year look at what terms are relevant. Should we be adding new terms or subtracting other terms? Similarly, we do a hand search through what we consider to be high yield journals. Each year we change this based on if we're identifying all of the articles through PubMed or other searches, we remove them from the hand search. And if we find we're missing things, we include them. And we actually manually go through every article and screen them for inclusion. And the next step is a gray literature search. This is the current list of websites that we review every year. And again, this changes based on feedback from our gray literature team. Each year we look at how many articles were identified and ultimately included from each website and adapt as needed. Once we do that large search, we then subdivide all of the articles into different categories by 2 methods. The first is these 3 different categories where all articles are classified into, which is emergency care and research limited settings, disaster and humanitarian response, and emergency medicine development. And then we also divide everything into one of two types of articles: original research or systematic review. And the reason we separate things into original research or systematic review is because of our scoring approach. We then take all of the articles that were searched, they're screened, title and abstract screening by our reviewer team. And then all of the ones that are screened in and are maintained are then scored in a full text review. And they're scored on a scale of 0 to 20 by set criteria. These are the criteria here that we look at: clarity, study design, ethics, importance, and impact. And this changes slightly the weight. We try to reassess this every few years to make sure that we're using the best scoring process possible to identify the key articles. So for 2020, we have just finished our review for the 2020 year, and we're currently just finalizing the manuscript, and it'll be submitted within the next, usually 2 weeks. We aim to submit each year's manuscript by the end of May. And for the past year, we identified the most articles ever, which has been continuing to climb in the history of the review, representing the growth of the subspecialty of global emergency medicine. Just over 30,000 articles were identified from our search, plus another 5,000 that were COVID specific. At the outset of the year, we start to review at the end of the summer each year. We weren't sure what was going to happen with COVID and publications. So we flagged all COVID articles that came up in our search separately to see if there was going to be a large amount. Despite identifying over 5,000 of them that came into our search criteria, very few screened in because most were not low resource setting or LMIC specific or specifically applicable to global emergency medicine in the context that we define global emergency medicine in the review. So most were actually tossed because they were more broadly applicable. 386 articles were screened in this past year. And once they're screened in, that means these articles all underwent full text review and were scored by our reviewer teams. And then once the scoring is done, again from 0 to 20, we take the top scoring articles from each category, the 3 different categories: emergency care and resource limiting setting, disaster humanitarian response, or development, and then the top 5% of articles overall. That's what is included. And now this year was 22 articles. A quick word about our team. It's a large team that is really great to work with. We have 4 people on the editorial board, which are managing editors, and that oversee the whole process, both for the GEMLR review that we're discussing now and also for our systematic review, as well as our various other committees and social media accounts and things like that. And then we have 8 editors. Each editor runs a team of 4 reviewers, plus another assistant reviewer, who is a reviewer in training, basically. Then we have 31 reviewers, and separately, we also have on our systematic review team another 5 members. These are people who were previously reviewers or editors who work on our systematic review. Our last systematic review just came out a few weeks ago in Journal of Global Health, and it was on mobile health interventions. And the one coming up for this year that we're just finishing up is on respiratory illness treatments in low resource settings. And then we also have 4 advisory board members, which are past editors and editors in chief, who stay on to help us with our committees and the overall management. Overall, 10 countries represented on our team. So the second half of this talk, I'm going to quickly go through 3 of our top articles that we thought would be the most useful to all of you in your work and practice and to others doing global emergency medicine research. Again, there was 22 included, but we don't have time to go through them all, but the paper will hopefully be out in the next few months and you can check it out. The first one is from Bulletin of the World Health Organization, and this is from the WHO team, and this paper was led by Kaylin Warner, who's in South Africa, and this looked at cost effectiveness of emergency care interventions in low and middle income countries. So as everybody here knows already, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but an organized emergency care system can theoretically leverage economies of scale and scope by employing these low-cost interventions that can, in theory, save millions of lives. The problem is we don't know much about cost effectiveness of emergency care interventions in low and middle income countries. And this is where these interventions can have the greatest impact. So what the team here did was a systematic review of all literature on emergency care interventions and LMICs looking at cost effectiveness of these interventions. And it's carried up until May 2019. They found just over 1,600 articles. Ultimately, 39 were included and abstracted. And these studies fell into 5 different categories of cost effectiveness evaluation in emergency care interventions. And you can see them here: pre-hospital services, training, treatment interventions, diagnostics, and then facilities or packages of care. Ultimately, what they found, and this is a great paper, it's Bulletin of World Health Organization, so you can get it for free online. And it's really worth reading if you're doing work in this area, because it's probably the best review that we have to date of cost effectiveness of these interventions that we talk about in research and try to create all the time. And what they found was that there's huge gaps of evidence, which is not surprising, but at least now we have somewhere to bring it all together. One of the big gaps was that of the articles that were included, they only represented 24 countries. So there are 137 LMIC countries, and only 24 of them are represented. So we have massive blind spot of these cost-effective interventions. So this is really a starting point more than any kind of definitive finding. And the studies that were included were all done very differently and overall fairly weak methodologically. But what the paper does is does a great job in a discussion of trying to address this challenge of getting more research out there, how we can do it, how we can do studies with more methodological rigor in lower resource and lower middle income countries, and how we can actually try to answer this question to show that these interventions are cost effective, which we believe that they are. And it has a nice list of future work and how to guide it so we can advance this information for policymakers to hopefully implement some of this work on emergency care that we do. So definitely worth reading, and I highly recommend it. The next article is in PLS1, and this one is from out of the Duke Global Health Institute. And this is another systematic review. So 2 out of the 3 articles are systematic reviews. And this one is really interesting because it looks at prevention of unintentional injuries in children in low and middle income countries. And while there's a lot of studies looking on mortality and things like that, this takes a bigger picture of looking at the prevention of injuries, and not just mortality, but also morbidity, which is quite extensive. As many of you already know, that injuries are a leading cause of death and disability among children. Just under 1 million children under 18 die every year in the world from unintentional injuries. And not surprisingly, in low and middle income countries, the rates of injury mechanisms are far higher than in other settings. And this is just some of the review that this paper does, and talks about some really striking statistics. In LMICs, 93% of pediatric mortality from car accidents occurs in LMICs, and 98% of drowning incidents of children in the world occur in LMICs. I mean, these are huge numbers. The burn mortality rate for children in LMICs is 10 times higher, and fatal poisoning 4 times higher. So really just striking numbers here. And what makes it even more striking is that many, if not most, injuries are predictable and preventable with relatively low cost investments that can be done. So what this review did was look at all of the prevention initiatives that are done for childhood unintentional injuries in LMICs to see how we could be doing a better job. This is their main finding right here. After searching about 4,600 articles, they included 74, and this carried up until May 2020. So just up until recently. They categorize interventions on the left, the different types of preventative interventions that you can see, and then the bars are what type of injury it addressed. So it's a nice summary here, and whatever your interest is, if it's advocacy, policy change, research, future programming, this is a great paper to take a look at to really get you started on what's out there for injury prevention. And it goes ahead and talks about a lot of the limitations, which are similar to the prior paper. Lack of randomized trials. Many of the studies had a high risk of bias and very unequal geographical distribution. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And that's what this group identified, that these cost-effective interventions, they exist, but we don't have evidence to take to policymakers or governments to make real change. And that's where we all come in to try to do the future studies and research that can hopefully improve these outcomes and even prevent injuries from occurring. The third and last paper is a randomized controlled trial that was published in New England Journal of Medicine last year. And this looks at amoxicillin for clinically diagnosed pneumonia in children in Malawi. So also a stat that most people are probably already aware of, pneumonia is a major cause of death in children under 5 around the world. The current WHO recommendations for clinically diagnosed pneumonia, there's a set criteria for severity, including fast breathing and chest indrawing and some other characteristics. This is specific for chest indrawing pneumonia in an immune competent child. So this is not an HIV child, not a malnourished child. This is an immune competent child. The current recommendation is 5-day course of amoxicillin. So it's unclear if that's really needed though, and if it can be done shorter, which is what this study looked at, is could they do a 3-day course, because that's done for rapid breathing pneumonia already. New England Journal is nice because they make this really beautiful visual abstract that I can just pull from them to show you, which is far better than anything I could have done, but it lays out the study and what they did pretty clearly here. It was randomized double-blind trial, but it looked for non-inferiority in Malawi, 3,000 children, 3 days of amox versus 5 days of amox. And what they found is that 3-day treatment was non-inferior. So antibiotic duration has poor evidence in many areas for many diagnoses. And what this study does is it gives the opportunity to unify the WHO guidance for pneumonia. And if 3 days is adequate, then it's going to improve resource utilization. It'll probably improve compliance of treatment and simplify treatment recommendations. This study's big limitation was that they did not look at HIV or malnourished children. Also, it's geographically regionalized to one country. But I think it's a great starting point to look at how we treat pneumonia. So those are just a sampling of 3 of what I thought of the 22 that we had were the most interesting and impactful studies. The first 2 are, I think, really great reviews for you to look at. And the third is something that's potentially practice changing. So just to wrap up, and we'll have a minute or 2 for questions. GEMLR is ongoing. We have a website at gemlr.org. There's an email that goes to a few of us that if you want more information. As we wrap up our review for this year, we usually take about a month off, and then we will be calling for applications over the summer. So please keep an eye out when we do call for applications. We usually send it to the various listservs that people are on, which are through the Fellowship Consortium, through GEMA and SAEM, and also through ACEP International. And basically anybody else will let us access their email lists. So please share with your friends, because we're always looking for new people. And as people move on to fill the gaps, as you can see, we have about a 40-person team. So there's a lot of room for networking and growth. So thank you, everybody, and have nice to virtually see you all. And I guess we'll have a minute or so for questions.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, I'll ask Sean now to stop his screen share and have everyone else turn on your videos if you are able. If you have a question, please raise your Zoom hand in the reactions and I'll call on you, because we do have a hard stop in 2 minutes. And while people are finding out about questions, Sean, I'll just get us started. How is GEMLR addressing the need, Sean, for decolonization and author equity in global health research? I know that's a topic we're all thinking about these days.
Yeah, that's thank you. Excellent question. And it's a very important topic that is long overdue, that I think all of us as global emergency medicine practitioners are acutely aware of. So one of the things with GEMLR that we hope to do is to increase awareness of the research process and methodology, and also to increase the capacity around the world of emergency medicine researchers to be able to do this research. So we make a big effort to include people from other countries in our team. We do not want this to be an American or a Western-centric review, although it really is right now by default, because that's where it was started. And the overwhelming majority of our team members are either American or European or Australian. One of our biggest goals of GEMLR in the past, and particularly this year, is to expand and diversify our team. So we ask that all of you, when you see the emails, or please share that last slide with our information with any of your contacts, partners, networks around the world, because we want this review to be done by the people that it most represents. So please share this with your network so we can keep including more people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I know we have 20 seconds. Kelly, quick question. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks. For any trainees or mentees in particular, is there any level of training that people need to have in order to volunteer?
No, I mean, generally, I'd say the lowest trained is medical students, and the majority are residents or fellows or junior attendings. But we encourage anybody to apply, and we will take it case by case.
Well, thank you very much, Sean Kivelhan, and everyone for joining this session. And I hope you guys have a great SAEM.